XBRL, Impact on Corporate Filers. We're going to get started in just a couple minutes. Hi, it's Michelle Savage with XBRL US. We'll get started in just a few seconds. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining. This is Michelle Savage with XBRL US. You are here for the webinar Inline XBRL, Impact on Corporate Filers. We're very happy to have with us today some great speakers. We have Stephen Horowitz. Stephen is Manager of Technical Services and Web Applications at NovaWorks. We have Jarrett Klokota, Executive Director of Assurance Services at Ernst & Young. Joe Luchka, Compliance Solutions Team at KPMG. And finally, Lou Roman, who is the chair of our XBRL US Data Quality Committee, and he's also Vice President of XBRL Services at Merrill Corporation. Before we get started, let me just run through a few quick logistical points. If you have any technical difficulties, please email us at support, S-U-P-P-O-R-T, @xbrl.us, and we will get you back online. And also for those of you who are getting CPE credit, please make sure to respond to the 4 poll questions that you see at 2 different points during the program today, and you'll be able to get your CPE credit that way. So with that, let's just go straight into our program. For our agenda today, we're going to have a quick introduction to Inline XBRL. Then we're going to go straight into various features of Inline XBRL. What we want to do today is not really focus so much on the rule, which we did on our last webinar, but we're going to talk about the differences between conventional XBRL, which most of you are used to, and Inline XBRL. So we'll be talking about hidden tags, duplicate amounts, dimensions. We'll talk about the revised posting of XBRL on corporate websites. Then we'll take a couple CPE questions. Then we'll go back to additional features of Inline XBRL covering continuations and exclusions, transformations, handling dates. And then we're going to do a quick demonstration of the SEC Inline XBRL viewer, and then take a couple of final CPE questions. So with that, just to give you a quick overview of the rule, which most of you are pretty familiar with at this point. But the final rule was approved on June 28th, 2018. And operating companies, as noted in the rule, were phased in over a 3-year period. Large accelerated filers were required to begin complying with their first fiscal period ending on or after June 15th, 2019. Accelerated filers are required to begin filing using Inline XBRL with their first fiscal period ending on or after June 15th, 2020, and all other filers, including foreign private issuers, are required to begin using Inline XBRL with their first fiscal period ending on or after June 15th, 2021. Another important feature of the rule is that regardless of phase, all filers comply beginning with the first 10Q that they need to submit to the SEC after their compliance date. So those are the basics of the rule. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lou Roman from Merrill Corporation, who's going to talk us through hidden tags in XBRL.
Thank you, Michelle. And on the top of this first slide, it just says hidden XBRL, and it's a feature of XBRL that I want to talk about. In the traditional HTML financial statements that we're all used to, there are of course many amounts, or I'll call them fact values, that need to be tagged, and most of those are all visually displayed in that traditional financial statement document. And within Inline XBRL, those visually displayed items, they're all tagged accordingly. Okay, that all works fine for tagging in Inline XBRL. But what about those items that are required to be tagged by the SEC? They're required, but they aren't visually displayed in the HTML document. For those items, there's a feature in Inline XBRL that's called hidden XBRL. And I know that term hidden XBRL kind of sounds bad. It sounds negative because it sounds like there's something that's being hidden from the users of the XBRL, or maybe the company is hiding something that is useful and that's a place to do it. But even though it sounds deceitful, it is not. Hidden XBRL is a very helpful feature. So what is it? In plain English, I'll say it's a section in the XBRL where you can put those items and tag those items that don't show up in the traditional HTML financial statement document. So hidden XBRL allows you to have that place. It's for tagged items with potentially no corresponding HTML presentation. So Michelle, if you click, it'll show a box here that has some example items that are required to be tagged by the SEC. And these may or may not be displayed in the HTML document, but yet, as I say, they need to be tagged. So from these examples, let's look at actually the last item on that list, which is the entity central index key. That CIK number is not displayed in the HTML document of any filer, at least of any filer that I've seen or known. But yet we must tag that element using the tag entity central index key. That is the tag. So that fact value is tagged as normal, but the fact itself has no place in the regular HTML document. So it is placed in the inline XBRL document using that special feature of hidden XBRL. By doing that, the fact or the amount gets tagged appropriately in the XBRL, but it doesn't appear in the HTML presentation anywhere. And really that is appropriate because that CIK number is not showing up anywhere in the HTML document. Now, to see that number and to see if it's really tagged, you can't just look at the inline HTML financial document and find it. It's not there. What you have to do is look in the inline XBRL viewer in a specific place. You have to know where to look, but there's a place for hidden XBRL facts. And that's how you see what is there that is hidden. Later, Jarrett will show us more about the SEC inline viewer. So I'll leave that knowing that there is a place in the viewer that you can see these hidden XBRL items. On the same list, let's look at the first item on the list, which is the document type says 10K. 10K is actually the fact value that gets tagged. But that number actually isn't that number. That value 10-K really isn't in the financial statements anywhere. However, it does display on the cover page of the 10K document. So it really wouldn't, I guess you could say it wouldn't be wrong to put this fact in the hidden XBRL, since it's really, it's a DEI, document entity information item, that isn't in the financial document. But, so I'll say that it wouldn't be wrong, but I think it's more appropriate, and it is recommended that since it is displayed on the cover page, to tag that text of 10K that's on the cover page that shows right there, and then thereby it would not be included in the hidden XBRL. So when tagging document type, if it does show on the cover page, I'd recommend tagging that text that's specifically there on the cover page rather than saying, let's put this in the hidden XBRL. So as a general rule, if the fact value is displayed in the HTML filing wherever, whether it's in the financial statements or on the cover page or anywhere else in the HTML document, it is appropriate to tag it in that visual place and then forego the hidden XBRL. And I will say one other thing about the cover page is that don't forget that in the FAST Act proposal, which has not yet been adopted, they did indicate that things will be tagged on the cover page in the future. So that may actually be required to be tagged directly from the cover page. Let's now talk more about those items that are displayed in the HTML and must be tagged, because so far I've been talking about things that aren't displayed in the HTML document. And Michelle, if you go to the next slide, it says nested, or it says, it shows the stockholders' equity section where one value representing two XBRL elements. So this is an aspect of hidden XBRL that I want to cover. Most numbers that are displayed, such as a number of 40 million, has a comma, or has two commas, 40, comma 000, comma 000. And this doesn't show on the page here. I'll get to that in a moment. But those numbers like that with commas in them, they're automatically transformed in XBRL to the actual XBRL fact, which 40 million is really 40,000,000 without a comma. So a lot of automatic transforming is occurring with XBRL, and there'll be much more about that later. But there are some facts that appear in the HTML that need to be tagged, but they can't be transformed automatically to an XBRL value. So the SEC created a mechanism for those items, and that's called SEC-IX hidden XBRL. So it is another form of hidden XBRL. The form I was talking about before, let's call that regular hidden XBRL. And what this SEC thing is, I'll call it SEC hidden XBRL. The SEC hidden XBRL simply takes those non-transformable values, and nil is one of them, puts them in a hidden section, and then links them to the tagged item, whatever and wherever that tagged item is, links them to the place in the HTML that that item is presented. So what good is that? The benefit is that now that tagged item can be easily located in the HTML filing. By clicking on the tagged item, you'll be able to find where that's at. And the SEC hidden XBRL, in a nutshell, simply takes these non-transformable values and links them. The nil value is one of those, as I said. So let's take the example of commitments and contingencies. That amounts in the HTML, it's usually blank. It's on the face of the balance sheet. It has no value for the tagged item. We don't tag it as 0. We tag it and give the nil attribute shown as true. So it's kind of an odd way to tag something by finding the tag and then instead of giving a value, just changing the nil attribute to true. But the SEC hidden XBRL feature, it allows that tagged item, in this case it has no value, to be linked to the place that it's shown in the HTML filing, in this case in the liability section of the balance sheet. So there's really two kinds of XBRL, the regular one that I talked about, which the CIK number handles, and all those are in the XBRL specification for inline XBRL. SEC created this mechanism for those items that can't be transformed, and we will talk about transformations later. And that SEC hidden is basically to link those types of items so that they can be found in the HTML. So I'll leave that as such and go on to this slide that we have here, which there's one additional aspect of hidden XBRL that needs to be brought up. And that occurs when a value is shown in the HTML, and that one value represents two separate XBRL concepts or two tagged items. So if you look at on this slide, the stockholders equity section, there's a 20 million number, and all these numbers need to be tagged, but that 20 million number, and it says shares issued and outstanding. So there's one number there, but it really represents two XBRL elements. Common shares issued is the first element, and then common shares outstanding is the second element that is actually required to be tagged. So it's tempting for this one to take the first 20 million number and use the first tag, common shares issued. And then it's tempting to place the other 20 million number, which doesn't display, and put that in the hidden XBRL section and tag it with the second tag. Because someone may think logically that the second 20 million is not displayed in the HTML, and that's what hidden XBRL is for, so let's do that. But that is not appropriate. That would not be appropriate to do that. There's a better way to tag that 20 million for those two tags, and that's what's called nested nested XBRL. And on the next slide, the heading is nested tags, but with this nested XBRL, the best way to look at it is, if you see on the slide, it says tag A 20 million and then tag A. That's the closing tag with a slash through it. So that would be the normal way to tag 20 million if it were just pertaining to one element. In this case, the tag A would be shares issued, 20 million shares issued, ending tag. Nested XBRL, if you look at the line right below that, says let's take that 20 million and tag it twice by nesting tag B and tag A together. So not that a lot of you will get into the actual angle brackets of this, but it's important to know that when you come across something like this, 20 million shares issued and outstanding, it's not hidden XBRL. That would be inappropriate. The appropriate way to tag that 20 million is to use this feature of nested tags, which is in the inline XBRL specification that says I can wrap tag A around the 20 million and also wrap tag B around the 20 million, and therefore I've tagged that number twice, even though it only displays one time. And that's the beauty of nested tagging. So in that case, do not use hidden XBRL. That's all I've got on hidden XBRL for the moment. Those are the things and features that will come about when trying to tag and when you're looking and reviewing XBRL. On the next slide, simply want to cover one additional item, which is duplicate amounts in the HTML. And this one's much simpler than the hidden XBRL I was just talking about. Here's a disclosure, and there's two sentences, let's say, in the disclosure. One of them says purchase goodwill from acquisitions totaled 85 million in 2017. And let's say later in the same filing, maybe in the same paragraph or the next paragraph, it says the increase in purchase goodwill in 2017 from acquisitions was 85.1 million. It's really the same number, same tag, but it's a different number specifically in the displayed presentation. In this case, with inline XBRL, that number should be tagged twice. First is the 85 million, and then is the 85.1 million, 85,100,000. That is proper and okay. A few years ago, and from when XBRL first started, the appropriate way was to tag whichever of the two was more precise. So both those would be tagged as 85.1 million. However, that changed a few years ago, and with inline XBRL, it's continuing to say tag that number separately twice because it's displayed twice, and the SC allows it to be tagged twice as well. Even if the number were 85 million in both spots, it should be tagged 2 times with the same element in the same way. So that's the appropriate way for duplicate amounts in the HTML. That's all I have on that one, Michelle, so I will pass it back to you.
Lou, thanks very much. We're now going to turn it over to Joe, who is going to cover viewing dimensions.
Thank you, Michelle and Lou. So first off, let's start with the good news. The tagging of dimensions, or the tagging of facts that have dimensional attributes on them, isn't changing under inline. What I want to talk about over the next couple of slides is how dimensions are viewed in inline XBRL. One of the larger selling points of inline is that it will cut your review time when comparing the tagged facts to the HTML. So in the past, you might have had 2, sometimes 3 documents, your HTML of the financials, your rendering of your XBRL, and potentially even the XBRL within your software tool that you're using for the tagging. So that took quite a bit of time in order to go through and to confirm that both versions were in fact displaying the same information and the correct information, particularly with regards to signs and dimensions. Well, when you get to the inline viewer, and Jared's going to show you a little bit about this later on, as you roll the mouse over a value, a pop-up window will appear and will present certain information. So here you can see the tag name, the fact value, an axis and a member for this particular item, as well as the period and the measure and the scale. So this will give you some of the basics of information. And here you can see that this tag, the net sales passenger mainline, does in fact have an axis. It's a segments axis, and it has a member on it for mainline. Now that's relatively simple, and you can see that quickly and easily on this first top section of the first tab in the attributes window. And Michelle is now going to move to the second slide, and you're going to see that on the next slide, you could see that if you have situations where you have multiple axes and multiple members, it's still possible to see that information in the attribute window, but it becomes a little bit more difficult because you've got to scroll up and down in the box and then see which member is applied to which axis. So in this particular case, the 419 million has got multiple axes with members. You could scroll up and down, but it's somewhat difficult to see how does my 419 compare to my 954, to the 573, and to the other items in this particular column, or between the columns for level 1 and level 2. So I can see fairly easily that this 419 has got a level 2 member on it. But in order to make sure that the 734 in the first, I'd have to then click off and go to the other. Now, what this simply means is that it might take a little bit more time to review certain structures in XBRL. So if you have something that is in a paragraph and it may have individual values, simply rolling the mouse over that particular value will very easily allow you to see the tagged value and the tag name and any of the other attributes. When you get to some of the tables with multiple axes and multiple members, it may take a little bit more effort using the attributes window. If we could move to the next slide, Michelle. For example, if you're using particular software tools to do your tagging, depending on the specific tool that you have, it may be presented in more of a tabular format. So here you can very easily see that I've got the same fact values, the 419,706. It shows up on the left-hand side as the label. And in fact, you could actually toggle it and see the name of the tag. And you can see above it the various axes, domains, and members. And you can see how the 419 compares to the 954 and the 573. So the intent of these couple of slides is not to tell you that dimensions are changing, but you may need to kind of tweak your process a little bit to see what is going to be the easiest, most efficient, and most effective way for you to recognize what axes and members are applied to the values and the best way to conduct your review. So as you're going through the transition into Inline XBRL, allocate a little bit more time to figure out what method might work better for you. Moving to the next slide, we're going to see again how it appears in a traditional viewer that's available on the SEC website. And here you can see the same numbers that we were talking about before. And again, it appear in a slightly different format. Here it's also easy to see the relationships between the different values. So how is the 924 tag compared to the 548 or the 419? You know, which members are applied and which line items? So this is simply something to keep in mind as you start your process of transitioning to Inline, that some of your review processes may need to change. You may find yourself using different software versions or different software tools to look at different pieces of the document. So in some cases, if looking at a balance sheet or a simple paragraph and say footnote 1, you may find that the inline tool works great and you may want to continue with that. In other sections, you might find other options. Moving on to the next slide. Here's another particular area where you might find it easier to use the traditional viewer as opposed to the inline or your particular software tool. The key takeaway from what I've presented here on the slides is choose whichever tool will help you better fulfill your responsibilities to review the XBRL filing. You may not want to limit yourself to just one particular venue or one particular view of the data, but choose different views that will help you most efficiently and most effectively review that data. Moving on to the next slide, we're going to go to my second topic, which is one of the changes that was written into the rule, which has to do with the website posting requirement. For the last several years, companies have been posting the instance document files to their website and making them available for download so that investors or other users of the financial data could download the raw data from your website. Over time, we found that consumers of data have generally not been going to company websites to download the files, but either downloading them en masse from, say, a third-party provider of the data, perhaps another hosting service, or perhaps the SEC website. So the new rule will relieve you of that burden of having to post those files. And going forward, consumers of the data can obtain the XBRL data from, again, the SEC website, data aggregators who may make that data available for reporting purposes, or data feeds from a variety of different services, including some of your software providers. So this will be one thing that will save yourselves a little bit of time as we go forward in the transition to inline. And that completes my section today, and I'm going to hand it back to Michelle and have her do the first of the CPE questions.
Joe, thanks very much. Yeah, and I think we have a couple of questions before I jump into the CPE. One of the questions that we received is there a space limit on the number display for multiple axes? Lou or Joe, and maybe you could help us with that question.
I don't know that there's a space limit for the axes and for the member names. I think the box will simply expand to show additional text that would appear there, which might result in a little bit of additional scrolling. So that's, actually one of the points of my my presentation here is that you may choose that there are other ways, either the traditional viewer or your own software, to review certain sections where you have more dimensions and more text.
Thanks very much, Joe. Okay, let's go straight to the poll questions now. And you should be able to see this on your screen right now. So the first poll question we have is, large accelerated filers will need to begin filing using Inline XBRL with, and we have three options: their first fiscal period ending on or after June 15th, 2019, their first fiscal period ending on or after June 15th, 2020, or their first fiscal period ending on or after June 15th, 2021. So if you are getting CPE credit, please make sure that you respond to the question by clicking on one of the radio buttons. And we'll just give this about another 20 seconds or so. Okay, just did another 5 seconds. So please make sure to respond here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end the polling, and we will bring up our second question. Okay, the question is, the first filing that must be submitted using Inline XBRL is required to be either a 10K, a 10Q, or whichever filing is first after their compliance date. So again, we'll give you about 60 seconds for this. We're down to 40 seconds. Please be sure to respond if you're getting CPE credit. Okay, just like another 10 seconds, and we'll close down our polls. Okay, I'm going to close that down, and we will go back to our presentation here. And we're going to start with continuations with Steve Horowitz from NovaWorks. Steve?
Yeah, hi, thank you, Michelle. We're going to be talking about continuations now. Continuation tags allow for marking an area of text as part of a previous text fact. Now, unlike traditional XBRL, where you have text blocks that are actually discrete facts that are independent of each other, Inline XBRL requires you to tag all of these in the same document, obviously, Inline XBRL. So these are all tagging the same base information. Now, part of Inline XBRL is that it has to be well-formed XHTML underneath it. So you can't have one tag block that is not completed within the tag block it was opened in. So if you have overlapping areas of text that you want to tag in two separate facts, this really can't be done without using continuations to stitch together these separate blocks of text. If you go on to the next slide, I have a short example of that. You can see here we have note 1, 2, and 3. Now, let's say for argument's sake, we want to have our Note 2 text block appear at the end of our Note 1 text block and at the beginning of our Note 2 and Note 3 text block. So our overlapping area is Note 2. Now, without using continuations, we cannot do this. But if we have Note 1 with a single text block covering Note 1 and Note 2, within that block, we can tag Note 2 as a separate text block, and then we can tag Note 3 as a continuation of the Note 2 text block. This avoids us having any overlap between our text blocks and makes sure our HTML is well formed. If we go on to the next slide, we have an example here of using continuations for non-continuous text. This is a little bit more of a straightforward example using continuations. We're just saying that we have our Note 1 and we want to continue it after a block of unincluded text. So Note 1 and Note 3 are stitched together into a single block of text. Note 2 would be excluded from this block of text. Similar to continuations, we have exclusions. Now, all exclusions is marking an area of text as untagged data. Anything within these exclusion tags are not part of the tagged fact. This is very useful for removing anything that's HTML formatting, such as page breaks or table of contents links, not really material facts, but just appear in the HTML, make it look a little bit neater. If we go on to the next slide, there's a short example of that. You can see we have our Note 4 text block, and the red area there is just an exclusion from that text block, which is not actually included. If you were to view this in the Inline XBRL viewer, it would look as though it's one tag, but when you look at it in the traditional view, you would only see the Note 4 without the excluded area. So continuations and exclusions, just useful for stitching together blocks of text. Now, mentioned earlier was transformations. Transformations are an interesting topic in Inline XBRL. They're providing instructions on how to convert data from a written format to an XBRL format. A lot of the time, the data you see in your HTML file is not actually in the same format that's acceptable to XBRL. For example, the sentence, the company purchased 3 oil refineries in the last quarter. Well, the number 3 there needs to be tagged as an inline fact, but it's an integer data type, and the integer data type in XBRL only accepts the number 3 as an input. You can't type out the word 3. So the filer still has to report that, but other than using a hidden fact, how do you really do that? Well, you can use transformations. The SEC has a transformation that will turn a word like 3 into the number 3, using that XTSEC numWordSend for number word sentence transformation. If you go on to the next slide, we have a couple of other examples for word transformations. You can see we have input text like 5 years, 2 months. The output text from that's going to be included in the XBRL file is the ISO format for the duration date, P5Y2M. If you can go back one, there we go. We have a couple of other ones on here, like if you have the actual cardinal number, 1944, for example, the output text is 1944. We also have ones for no and none to transform those into zeros. So this is just allowing us to take human readable data and convert it under the hood into the XBRL data that the SEC is expecting. If we go ahead one slide here, we also have duration transformations. This is useful for covering transformations in periods of time. For example, if we have plant deprecation in years, 25, you don't have 25 years, you just have the number 25. So you have to use a duration transform to convert this. These are slightly different because you don't actually have the word years to base this off of. All you have is the number 25. This might be in an inline representation like we have in this example, or it might be in a table that shows just 25 with the column heading number of years. But in any case, you can use transformations to represent these as actual durations. And if you go on to the next slide, we have some examples of what these might look like. If you have a input text of this -22 number you can see the transformation will actually move that to be negative 22 years. You can have positive values as well, switching it into a period of months and days instead of years. You can also transform numbers like 0 into a number of weeks, into a number of days, into a number of hours, depending on what you actually want to do in your XBRL report. You have a lot of flexibility here to actually represent your numbers correctly. So these are some examples. In addition to the ones we've talked about here, the SEC transformations, there are additional 33 available at the link below that are supported by the SEC. And these cover things like Boolean transformations where you would convert them to true false values from a string value, or if you have date formats in different calendars, for example, the Japanese calendar, the Gregorian calendar. These are all different transformations that are available through your software vendor. You can contact them for more information on how to use these. And if we go ahead another slide, we have an example of what the syntax for a transformation might look like. Here you can see we have our actual tag value. The sentence we're tagging is on September 1st, 2017, the company completed. If we want to tag that date, September 1st, 2017, it would be with a non-numeric tag, and we need to specify the actual format as a transformation we're going to be using to convert that into the appropriate date format the SEC is expecting. In this case, our transform takes our date input, and it results in our 2017-09-01. In addition to transforming words, we can also transform numbers using sign transformations. When you're representing your numbers in your tables or in your HTML, frequently you use parentheses around a number to represent a negative value. Obviously, this doesn't work with XBRL. They're expecting a negative sign if it's negative. In this case, we would have to use a sign modifier to tag the number 1157 below as negative. And the sign modifier, if we go to the next slide, it's just an additional attribute that is attached to the fact value here. So you can see it has a sign negative value, which transforms our value. And you can also see the value is transformed by the num.decimal format, which actually removes the comma from it and just represents it as a standard non-formatted number that is negative. But the point of these transformations, again, is just to take the human readable format of the number and convert it into an SEC XBRL compliant number. And that is all I have on transformations. Michelle?
Great, thanks very much, Steve. We're now going to turn over to Jarrett, who's going to talk a little bit about Inline XBRL and dates.
All right, thank you, Michelle. I'm going to be sharing my screen. All right, so I'm going to first cover some context date considerations. Basically, a little difference between, viewing your HTML and, the dates for those amounts in the XBRL. So previous XBRL requirements in the agrifiler manual, and the SEC also has guidance around that in their FAQs, still apply to the XBRL filings and requirements. So just because the XBRL is embedded into that HTML and it has a date there, doesn't mean that the date is tagged with that viewable HTML. You have to actually click on the XBRL tag to see that. So it can be sometimes unclear whether the date is correct or not. So you just want to make sure that when looking at the accuracy of the dates, that you're actually clicking on the tag and reviewing that information and making sure that you're following those specific agrifiler manual rules and SEC guidance around, how to tag a date. Moving on to the next slide, I'm not going to go through all these agrifiler manual rules because they can be, quite techy, but basically my point here is there are still specific rules around how to tag dates and date contexts, and just make sure that you are still following those rules, because Inline does not take those requirements away. And then the next slide is an example from the SEC FAQs around date contexts. So if you have a period type of an instant, basically as of or on March 1st, you would use that same date. For an instance, as well, if it says in May, we acquired, $2 million, acquired a company for $2 million, that amount of $2 million would be tagged in the last day of May as 5/31. Also, if it says, in the second quarter for that amount, then you would tag it as the last day of if their calendar year of June 30th. Also for duration dates, so, that has a beginning and ending date, such as your income statement amounts, or, if it says in May, you're going to have a beginning date of 5/1 and then an ending date of 5/31. And same thing with if it's in May, in the second quarter for a duration, you're going to have the first day of that quarter and the last day of that quarter. So this isn't new. It's the same guidance related to context. I just wanted to make sure that it's clear that just because you're looking at the normal filing in the printed document, it'll have a date. Don't assume that the date in the XBRL is the same. It could be accidentally changed or not entered incorrectly. And then here's some just more guidance around context dates. Once again, not new, but making sure that you're following that. So, in the normal period, you wouldn't have members, that relate to that date. But if you have a period that's subsequent to the filing period, you would use a subsequent event member. And Joe mentioned about dimensions. Once again, there's specific rules on when to use members or dimensions and when not to, and those haven't went away. So if it's still a subsequent period to the filing, you'd use a subsequent event member. And if it's in a future date from the filing period, then you would use a forecast member for that dimension. So once again, not new, but just knowing that these requirements do not go away. And my next section, I'm going to actually be providing you with a demonstration of the SEC Inline XBRL Viewer. It's a newer open source software tool for viewing, navigating, and searching public company financial reports that are submitted to the SEC. So when you open up a 10Q, 10K, 20F, 40F, it'll look like a normal HTML filing, except it has the software already available, and then also companies can take that software or that code and include it in their viewers as well. And it'll provide, and I'm going to basically provide you with an introduction to how the viewer lets you navigate that, how you review it and search. So if you give me a couple seconds, I'm going to switch to the online viewer. So the following is just a mock-up example that the SEC provided on their website of an inline document and what basically the viewer will look like. So when viewing the filing using the inline viewer, you can see that there's borders around each tagged disclosure. And then I'm going to show you, see this 10Q as Lou was talking about for the DEI. If I click on that, it'll pop up and show you the document type that's 10Q, 9 months ending 9/30. If I click onto the next section, it'll tell you the definition of that tag. It'll tell you what the label is for that tag. And then if there's other information related to it, and I'll actually go down to the financial statement so you can see some of the other information that's tagged in there. So here's for cash and cash equivalents. It has the amount, the date that's in US dollars. It's rounded in thousands. It's got a balance type of a debit. It's entered as a positive. It's a monetary type. This shows the definition, the label, and go to the next. It'll also show you the references. So the accounting standards codification from the FASB, it'll tell you what what sections, subtopic 210 for this, and what other related accounting standard codifications that tag relates to. And that's an important thing to notice. Because of this codification, this viewer allows you to search for topics. So if you're not just reviewing for accuracy, but a user of the data can search and say they're looking for a specific topic, and I'll show you in a little bit how that works. And then also you can see the weights, the balances, and if it has a calculation, you can actually see the calculation as well. So all that information around XBRL is still there, and Inline makes it easier because it's actually embedded into your original file document. In this viewer, if you click on menu, there's a settings tab here. And the reason I'm showing you this is when you perform a search in this search bar, you can choose that it can search in the labels. You can also search for a specific word in definitions. You can look for members and references. So I'm just going to show you I click the references. So let's say you're looking for stock-based comp numbers. So I know that's, as an accountant, that's, it would be related to ASC 718. So since I clicked on the reference, if I type in 718 in the search bar and click the search, and I go here, and in the corner there's facts. So if I click this and expand it, it'll show you all the facts that are linked to stock-based comp, and it will highlight those numbers. So in our search, I clicked on 718, and it shows these numbers: excess tax benefit and for share-based compensation. So if I click on that number and move to the reference, you'll see here's the ASC 718. So it's popping up that information. So if a user of the data, if they're looking for specific information, this provides them the ability to search and find numbers or related information very quickly. There's also included in this viewer various filters. So if I click on the data filter, it allows you to only search amounts only, text block tags only. And then we know that there's certain areas of XBRL that have always been challenging. So someone who wants to review their XBRL or someone who's looking for specific things, you can look at and click calculations only. And when I click on that, I'm going to close this. This will only show you the amounts that have a calculation related to it. So these numbers here don't have a calculation associated, so you don't see the red lines. But the amounts here do have a calculation associated with it. And you might say, well, these amounts add to this total. Why don't they have a calculation? And you'll have to look in and see why. And I can tell you the reason for this, the fact that these don't, is because each number has different members, and you know that there's specific rules around when you can and can't have calculations. And since these have different members, they can't have a calculation link base. But that's an easy way for certain areas when you're focusing on to check to say, should I have calculations? Am I missing any calculations? Also negative values. That tends to be a common area where some companies struggle with, where they enter that as a negative incorrectly when it should be a positive. So if you filter out all the amounts that are negative, you can look to see, okay, this is entered as a negative. Should it be negative? Is it following the rules that the SEC put out, and also the various guidance around negative values? Also, it gives you the ability to look at standard tags or custom only or extension tags. So if you're focused on, which tags did we extend, you can scroll down and look for it'll show you in red which tags are extended or not. In this case, I don't see any extension tags. There's also more filters. So a period, if you're looking for a specific date or period, you can filter that out. And then when you're searching for amounts, it'll only show those tags within that specific period. Here. So I'm going to pick 9/30/2016. and it looks like, oh, I have a lot of, this is another thing to mention. You should always take out, you can clear all or take out some of your filters, because I filtered out negatives. So I apologize for that. So I'm going to clear these. And then show you, now we can go back to the periods and select the 9/30/2006. And as you see, not all the amounts have red lines on them, so it's only filtering out and showing you which numbers are tagged. So if you're looking at should it be tagged correctly under this, you can see those, and if they're not highlighted in red, you might have the wrong date, and you can always click on those to see if you have the right date. So I'll now pass it along to Michelle so she can go back to sending CPE questions and continue with the presentation.
Jared, thanks very much. Just a quick question as we bring up the CPE question from the audience. Will the viewer show the durational period context of period start date as well as the period end date?
Yes. So let's go to, here, this should have net sales. When I'm clicking on that, it should. Let's see here. So it looks like the way that the viewer is showing, it's saying 9 months ending, but it will show the period type that should say duration. So I think that's currently in this code, it looks like it's just saying at the period end, but you should be able to see that information. I know with a filter periods, it has as of or period 9 months ending period and 3 months ending period. So that's how that's what shows up in the viewer. If it's an instant, it'll have as of, it's a duration, it'll be 9 month or 3 month ending. It won't show the beginning and ending date.
Okay, so you just interpret it then. Okay. All right, well, thank you. Let's go on to some poll questions now. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay. All right. So again, if you're getting CPE credit, make sure that you take a look at your screen here. Okay, so the third question rather, that we have here is continuation tags do the following. Mark an area of text as not being a part of any fact, or do they provide instructions on how to convert data from a written format to an XBRL format, or do they allow for the marking of an area of text as part of a previous textual fact? So if you could record your response here, and we've got about another 30 seconds to go. We have received a few additional questions, and we're running a little bit out of time, but we'll try to take some questions, and if we don't get to them, we'll try to respond to them later on by email. Okay, so just a few more seconds here for the CPE question. All right, I'm going to end the polling, and we'll go to our fourth CPE question. Okay, and the question is, transformations do the following. Allow for marking an area of text as part of a previous textual fact, or provide instructions on how to convert data from a written format to an XBRL format, or marks an area of text as not being a part of any fact. Okay, so record your response. And we've got about another 30 seconds here. Okay, just about another 15 seconds. Okay, then we'll have a couple of questions, and then my plan is to talk to you about some upcoming programs and events from XBRL US. So, okay, so we're going to close down that poll. Thank you for recording your responses. And we do have a couple of questions that I'm going to ask our speakers here. How do you view hidden facts in the viewer? I don't know, Jared, if you want to give that one a try. How do you view hidden facts in the viewer?
This is Lou. I'll jump in. I'm
Okay.
just getting ready. There's a spot called additional items. It's one of the drop-down menus toward the left. And if you click on additional items, it'll give you additional items that aren't displayed in the regular inline HTML document. So
here's the viewer, and if you click on data, additional items, and then you look at the facts on the side, it'll show you those. So if I'm clicking on that, you'll see some of the additional items that were tagged in this document. And here's an example of nil being tagged for the none, and so on. And some, as in this document, it doesn't have all the amounts. So certain things that were tagged may not be included in this example filing, but that's how you would actually view them.
Great, thank you, Jarrett. Okay, another question. Currently, all element labels must match the exact wording in the original HTML or ASCII file. With Inline XBRL, does this rule still apply? I don't know who would like to take that question.
I'll say that the same rules apply in inline, and Joe mentioned this earlier. Same rules apply for inline versus XBRL as was previously done. So yes, and I wouldn't say everyone needs to match exactly, but I get what the question is asking, and the general answer is yeah. The labels are the same. Generally, the same things apply.
Great, thanks, Lou. Okay, another question, is the ending date used the last day of the fiscal month or calendar? In the example of May, it says use 5/31. What if the fiscal month ends 5/29? I think that may be a question for you, Jarrett.
I would say it really depends on the context of what you're disclosing. If the amount is as of 5/29, I would say to tag it as 5/29. If you're just saying in the month of, but it's not related to your specific fiscal period, then I would have it as of the end of that month. So it's really what context you're disclosing.
Okay. Okay, great. Okay, let's go. And I realize, let me just share my screen again here. Okay, I think that's all the time we have for questions. And I want to thank all of our speakers. I think they did a great job. There's a lot of area to cover here, and I'm sure we will be having other events going forward. Thanks also to all of our attendees who were able to join us today. We have recorded this event, and we will be making the replay available in the next day or two. And last, I just wanted to talk about a couple of other programs that may be of interest, particularly to the SEC filers on the call. One of the programs that we have had in place for a few years now are data quality rules, which many of you may be familiar with. And these are rules that are specifically for SEC filers. And they're basically a set of automated rules that can be run against an XBRL instance document to identify any errors in XBRL financials. And these rules generate a report which is very much what you see on the screen here, which provide instructions for you on how to correct those errors. So if you look at the top one, this indicates that the date of June 30th, 2015 used for dividends payable, and the subsequent event type access with the value of August 10th, 2015 is earlier than or the same as the reporting period end date. So it explains that this is a conflict in dates that should be corrected and tells you essentially how to make a fix. Down below that, you see a different type of error, and this one is a negative value error. This indicates that allocated share-based compensation expense is recorded with a value of -1 million, which is obviously less than 0, and it should not have a negative value. So it explains that it should be reported with a positive value. So these are some error messages that can be generated by using the Data Quality Committee rules, and these are freely available rules. You can see them up on our website. You can use them through a tool that we have available, or frankly, an easier way for you to use it is by looking for data quality certified software, and you can find a list of those software applications that have been certified to run the data quality rules. If you go to this web address, you want to look for rules, for applications that have been certified for the latest set of rules, which is rule set 6. And those are the ones that are approved to work with the rules, to successfully run the rules. So these are important rules to take a look at, and they can really help you improve the quality of your filings. Last, I want to mention a couple of upcoming events. Again, these are also free programs. We have a webinar on Inline XBRL and data quality. So this one is a little bit different than the one today. It's going to be held October 17th at 3 o'clock, and you can register on our website, and we'll send you a link to that when we send out the replay link. We also have an in-person program coming up on November 8th, our XBRL US Investor Forum 2018, Powering FinTech. This is taking place in New York City, and we're very pleased to have a keynote speaker of SEC Commissioner Robert J. Jackson is going to be joining us at that event. Again, this is free, but registration is required, and we'll send a link out to this program as well. So with that, I want to thank everybody for joining us. Thanks again so much to our speakers, Jarek Lakota, Steve Horowitz, Joe Luchka, and Lou Roman, who've done a great job giving us the insights into inline XBRL versus conventional XBRL. Thanks again, and we hope to see you in October, our next event. Thanks.